A reminder that signing up at the $2 a month level on Patreon gets you early access to the episodes and access to the blog I write on Patreon every week. On May 22nd, 2020, this podcast prominently featured the disappearance of Julie Weflen, along with secondarily the cases of Deborah Swanson and Katherine Gregory. Today, you get to hear from an author and investigator offering new information on those three, along with one more. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. Given the format, the frequency, and ambition of Unfound, it's hard to get a complete 360-degree view of a missing person and that person's disappearance. Hey, as I've mentioned recently, it's tough enough to get one guest, let alone 3 or 4 or 5. This is why, with whatever family member appears, I try to ask the best questions, sometimes more than once, to make sure nothing is being missed or misunderstood. Even then, I'm not sure I've ever done a perfect interview. However, I have had the chance to reassess disappearances with different people after an episode has aired. For example, Robin Abrams. I originally interviewed her sister Jody in 2016. But in 2020, Unfound had another episode where I was able to interview a deputy with the Will County Sheriff's Office who was a witness to the harassment Robin endured back in 1990. He also discussed his knowledge and opinions on Robin's still unsolved disappearance. Well, today we're kind of doing that again, with 3 disappearances that all of you already know, along with a new one. This author has done a lot of work, probably not as much as the original guest John Polos, but enough that he should be taken seriously in his assessment of these cases. Let's examine his different point of view. Unfound News. We're at the end of June 2025, so for all Patreon and YouTube supporters, be looking for the next Found episode where I explore dissociative fugue once again. And for everyone else, look for the next Unfound Now episode. Hopefully, it will be as successful as last month's. Next, I hope you all will continue to tune in on Thursday evenings to the True Crime Trivia Contest that I do with listener D on her YouTube channel. It's a good time, and you all get to see a different side of me. Finally, by the time you're hearing this, I'll be on the road back to Florida. Dad and I had a great time together. It was fantastic seeing my brother and sister, and I was pleasantly surprised by my longtime best friends. But it's time to get back to the beach. A note before the interview starts. Unlike the original Weflen episode, this will not be a discussion that gets deep into the step-by-step of each of these cases. For that, please go back and listen to the original interview with amateur investigator and Julie Weflen's co-worker, John Polos, who continues to do great work on her disappearance. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound author Doug Eastwood. Doug, welcome to Unfound.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Ed.
You're very welcome. As a writer myself, maybe I've published some things, although they're not up on Amazon, right now because they really don't have anything to do with disappearances. But I love to get to know other people who write just like I used to do a lot of writing. So let's start right there. Doug, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into your process, and then eventually how you found out about all these disappearances and why you decided to write a book. But right now, tell listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm living up here in the Pacific Northwest, the Idaho Panhandle, to be more specific. Mm-hmm. I am an outdoors person. That has been my lifestyle forever. I worked for the city of Coeur d'Alene as the parks director for 35 years, and actually had not intended to do any writing. That was not on my radar screen. But I was asked by a foundation that manages a icon trail system here that I was involved with from the beginning, if I would write some stories for them about the trail, which I did. Eventually, I wrote enough stories that I had enough there to create a book. So I had to take a class on how to write and publish, which I eventually did, and dedicated the book to them. So they get 100% of the proceeds to help sustain that wonderful trail system.
Wow, that's fantastic. When was this done? When was this project?
That was done. I completed that one in almost 6 years ago.
Okay, so fairly recently.
Yeah.
Fairly recently. When you were first asked to do something like that, did it seem like a daunting task? Were you like, are you sure you're asking the right person, or did you have doubts?
I did not have doubts. I thought about it, and I thought, this is really worth doing, so I pursued all the avenues to get it done correctly.
Uh-huh.
And I never had any doubts about it. And then that led to my writing about a family tragedy. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of took me off into true crime, and I found that very interesting.
Okay. So when you said you took it like a class, like a writing, like a creative writing class, it's something at a college or what?
I did. When I looked at all the stories that I had written and realized I have enough here for a book, I also knew I didn't know how to put a book together. So I got online, and our local community college actually had a class on how to write a book. So I signed up for it, and the instructor was already a renowned author, a fellow named Jack Castle. Jack writes in the science fiction part of writing, but he was incredibly informative. We got to know each other very well. Like I said, that was more than 6 years ago. Jack and I still communicate today, and he has since moved from here, and he now lives in Florida.
All right, just like I do, although I'm not in Florida right now. Very interesting. So you were manager of the parks for 30 some years. What about when you're not writing, or your other interests? You said you're kind of an outdoors person. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about your family, maybe some of those things.
I probably have more hobbies than what should be legal. When we first moved up here, we moved up over 45 years ago. Okay. And one of the things that I was extremely interested in doing was hunting and fishing. And we have we're just blessed with natural resources in this part of the Pacific Northwest, lakes and rivers and streams and wildlife. Our mountains are just fabulous. The air quality is great. So it just felt like a natural fit, and I took those endeavors up with great interest. I also eventually went into cross-country bicycling and spent a lot of time, over a decade, riding a bicycle all over the Pacific Northwest and parts of Canada. Downhill skiing, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, water skiing, tubing. It's just that everything you can think about for public outdoor recreation is available to us, and I take advantage of it.
And somehow with all of that, you developed a writing career like 6 or 7 years ago. You fit that in. You
bet. There's always room for improvements. I have a small shop out in the backyard, and I do quite a bit of woodwork in that shop. So my hobbies are abundant, and never ending.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Thank you for all that. Very interesting. Now let's, of course, you talked about how, you had to go take this class, maybe about how to write a book. So let's, before of course, we're going to talk about these 4 disappearances that you've written about for your book, Vanished in the Pacific Northwest. How would you describe your writing process? I'll give you an example. I've written a lot of fiction in my life, and what I like to do is kind of do like a little paragraph for each scene in which each chapter. What is your process?
Well, the process on this particular one, Vanished, changed a couple of times when I got started, and I originally had planned to do this in a chronological timeline and bring each of the events into the book as they occurred. However, because there were so many characters and so many scene changes, it became very, very hard to follow, even for me. So I decided to break that down into the victims' stories individually. There is some overlapping of the stories within the book, and but I decided to do that with each individual victim having their own story.
Okay. And of course, people are going to find out. I mean, you talk to so many people for this book, and I want to eventually get into how you tracked all the, these people down. But when you're, kind of visualizing this book, are you kind of making some, just in cases, in case I can't talk to enough people for this particular disappearance? Was that kind of your thinking as well, like a backup plan if something didn't go the way you want? Was that also part of preparing for this book?
Well, here's the way I prepared for this one. Once I decided to write it, I was asked a little over 2 years ago if I would consider writing about these women. I respectfully declined. I just didn't think I was up for it. I came home, started researching it, and said, yes, these stories need to be told. So what I did from that point is I went to the libraries, both in Coeur d'Alene and Spokane, and got into their computer rooms and began researching the victims in Spokane and the victims in Coeur d'Alene. Through that process, I learned a lot about who the family members were, who the detectives were, and contact people throughout the investigations. With that, then I began to look for those people. I was actually pretty fortunate. I found almost all of the retired detectives on all of the cases, and they were extremely helpful. It was very, very interesting meeting with them, and in most cases, long distance conversations. But I would do that. So I would find out who the police were that were involved, the families that were involved, the friends that were involved. I would also look at any broadcast that may have happened that was archived somewhere, TV channel, a podcast, and I would watch some of those. One of the best examples is when I began the research on Katherine Gregory. There was very, very little. It was very frustrating to try to find information on her, and I did find one interview, and in the course of that interview I had to listen to it and re-listen to it, and I told myself something's wrong here. Something's wrong with the questions and something's wrong with the answers. That led me to want to contact her family, and I did find her older sister living in Virginia, and we talked about all that. And then she began to tell me the story, of which I wanted to know who Kathy was, which then helped me go down the path of wanting to identify each of these women in a manner that the reader gets to understand who they were. They were more than just a victim. They were somebody's daughter, a sister, a wife. They had lives and careers and dreams, and I want the reader to understand that and get to know them almost on a personal basis. So that became part of that writing, and in the book I tried to identify each of those women in that manner before I get to the fatal time when they disappeared.
Right. When you were starting this, any idea how long you thought this was going to take? You're starting this maybe a few years ago. Are you thinking, man, this is something, man, I might not be done to this till like 2027, 2028? Did you have any sort of time frame of when you needed to complete this?
I put a self-imposed timeline of 1 year. I missed that by about 14 or 15 months.
Okay. That's funny.
and the reason is a couple things that happen. I reach out to a family member who has just gone through a living hell with all of this when it happened. And sometimes I'll find them through social media, and I have to make contact and find out if they are the person, because there are several people out there with the same names.
Sure.
But I find out if they are the person that is a family member of this individual. And then I have to tell them who I am and what I'm doing and why I would like to talk to them. So that takes a little bit of time. There's some trust that has to be developed on their end. They don't want to talk to just some guy out there who's probably not going to do them the service that they would expect.
Right. Somebody's just kind of like nebbing around, is not going to do anything productive with it, just wants to get that information and maybe go on Reddit or somewhere just to, type something.
Yep. So we, once that conversation was opened up, then we would quite often talk on the phone. And we would talk for hours and hours about their family members.
Yeah. Great. Interesting. Maybe a little bit more about your writing. I mean, how much writing did you actually, of course, a lot of research, talking to people, but when actually, I'm guessing, some people still write books by doing longhand, but I'm thinking maybe you sat down at a computer to do this. Did you have like a word, like a word number for that day, like 1,000 words a day, or how did you work that all out?
I never really knew how much I would get done, and the thing that always amazed me is when I sat down, I had a lot of information that had to be transferred from my notes and my conversations onto the computer, but it would surprise me that 4, 5, 6 hours could go by very easily.
Yeah, right.
And so sometimes 1,000 words was it. I just needed to capture that moment. Sometimes it would be 4, 5, 6,000 words.
Okay, interesting. Are you that type of guy? I've often said when I've talked to people about my own writing that I used to do, you really have to be comfortable sitting alone with a computer. Are you that? Would you say you're necessarily that type of person, or is that just something you discovered about yourself in this process?
No, I am that type of person, and here's just a little bit more background. After I got married and had kids, I went back to college while I was working full-time to finish my degree. I didn't finish it before I got married, and so I would spend a lot of time studying and reading and preparing, and I was able to lock out the things that were going on around me. So I can do that rather effectively. So I can sit down in front of the computer, and there can be a lot of things going on, but I can zone in on what I'm doing and stay there.
Okay. And I have right here the outline that we're following, and I get this kind of, Stephen King wrote what I think is the best book just about writing maybe 30 years ago, and I still have it. Not that I've referenced it recently, but Stephen King, for example, is well known. He writes his books while listening to like heavy metal. He's a big AC/DC fan or anything. Do you have any quirks about your writing? Does it have to be a certain setting? Any superstitions about your writing?
No, not any specific settings. And what I tried to capture, excuse me, there was the actual setting or background for the environment of which all of these events occurred. I'm not really sure what you mean by superstitions.
Yeah, like baseball players. They eat the same, maybe have the same meals every day, or baseball players won't step on the foul lines, things like that. Something like that.
Nope, no superstitions. I don't have any concerns about walking under ladders or seeing a black cat or breaking a mirror. So I don't do those.
All right, I guess some people have those things. Where they're asked to do with athletics or musicians, things that they have to do every time before they're going to perform, and really. Writing, is a performance. I mean, people just aren't seeing it done right at that time. They're eventually going to see it. I guess that's why I was asking.
Yeah, I do not when it comes to writing. Now, I bowl a lot, and I do have some stretching exercises and some ball preparation I go through, but that's just getting ready for the game. Okay,
very good. Thank you. And if people are wondering, I really wouldn't say I have any superstitions either, but I know many people who do. And I know for me, I like when I'm doing my writing, everything has to absolutely be quiet or I can't concentrate. All right, let's move on to these disappearances. Now, what did catch my ear a few minutes ago when you said it, you were asked to write this book, or somebody commented that maybe they thought you should do it. Maybe we need to get into that a little bit about how this all came about. Doing this,
the last book I did, called "Closure Can Be a Myth," was about a personal family tragedy, and I had a meeting with some of the publishing group on that particular book, and it was a mandatory meeting. But I was asked at that point if I would consider writing about these women. And I just thought I wouldn't be able to find the time. I wouldn't be able to give it its due. But after I thought about it and researched them a little bit, I decided, you know what, this needs to happen.
Okay.
So that's how it came about, and that was well over 2 years ago.
Right.
And
all right, so somebody had commented, Doug, you should give these 4 disappearances a shot.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, were you familiar with them? Maybe if you're from the Pacific Northwest, I'm going to take for granted you've at least heard of one of them, maybe before you started writing. But how familiar were you with all of these before this was even brought up?
I was very familiar with Debbie Swanson. Debbie Swanson was a school teacher here in my town, but she disappeared off of Tubbs Hill. That was one of the natural parks that I managed.
Wow.
So I was very familiar with that, and all the research and all the search and rescue and all the effort that went into finding her. Sally Stone also was a local resident, and he disappeared so mysteriously that you have to wonder what happened and how can it happen in our small town. Julie Weflen, I was very familiar with hers, largely because it drew a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Julie Weflen had national attention on that disappearance.
Yes.
And the circumstances involved with this, she was abducted by force and taken and never found. So I was familiar with those 3. The one I was not familiar with was Katherine Gregory. And that one kept popping up in my research. So I said, I need to follow this one closer. And that one was a disappointment on my part that so little was done and reported about her disappearance.
Right, we're going to talk about that because everybody should know we're going to talk about these 4 disappearances specifically here in a moment, and certainly in that, particularly the Katherine Gregory chapters, you do get into, the mistakes that seemingly were made, in that disappearance, in that investigation back in the 1980s, for sure. I wanted to ask you, being that you knew at least 3 of them, did you have any preconceived notions, before you started, that we don't have to get into it now, maybe for each section we will, but any preconceived notions about these that maybe once you started talking to people and reading the news articles, you're like, wow, I think my mind's changing on this, or wow, this is really an eye-opener. Any preconceived notions that maybe were destroyed during the writing?
I did not have any preconceived notions about what happened or who may have abducted them. I had always thought that human trafficking might have come into play on that. We could find nothing that was substantiated. I've always thought that, was it somebody close to them? What could have happened? But I never really zeroed in and said, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is what happened. I waited for all of that to unfold as I wrote the story.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get into these disappearances. And as I've already kind of put at least part of this episode together, although I've not recorded anything yet, I think everybody needs to understand we're not going to get deep into the facts on each of these disappearances. That's really, of course, we want everybody to go out and get the book, in which Doug does get into the facts and times and dates and everything else. And of course, most of you know, we featured Julie Weflen's disappearance about 5 years ago with John Polos as a guest. Of course, Doug knows John, and maybe we can talk about him when we get to Julie's section. But just starting with Katherine Gregory, which my understanding, this is the one that was the most unfamiliar to you. Why don't you just go through the general facts about her disappearance, and then we're going to hit on what I think are some of the important points that were brought up in your book.
You bet. Katherine Gregory, she was, her maiden name was Ray, R-A-H-E, Katherine Ray. And as a young girl, she had aspirations to be a nurse. Always wanted to be a nurse. She grew up in the Carmel, California area and moved to Spokane when she was about 19 or 20 years old to pursue her nursing career, which she had already secured her RN degree. She was married. She got married here in Spokane when she was 23 years old. And just after celebrating her 24th birthday, she disappeared. The things that transpired, and a lot of this I did not learn from any of the documents or newspaper articles. I learned a lot of her background and her transferring up here from her family members after I got a hold of them, and they started to share with me all the things that they knew. So what I did learn from some articles is there's this just bizarre timeline on Kathy's disappearance. It was November 3rd, 1981, and it was 9:30 at night. Her best friend just dropped her off at home after they had attended an advanced nursing class in Spokane. And that was the last acquaintance of hers that saw her alive. The next morning, it was reported at about 9:30 a.m., that 12-hour period, that she and her husband left the house. They went out and had breakfast, went shopping for some Christmas gifts in downtown Spokane, stopped and picked up some groceries, returned home, and then he went to a work meeting, and she stayed home and prepared to go to work that afternoon. She had a 1 p.m. Shift that she was to report to. She worked in the newborn intensive care unit at Deaconess Hospital. So that timeline right there makes it interesting, because what I learned about Kathy is that she was very intense, very focused, very concentrated. She had a great sense of humor, they tell me. And some of the stories about her are in the book on her sense of humor. But her best friend, the one that she grew up with in California, also became a nurse. They both lived up here in Spokane. She told me that Kathy's personality was such that if something were bothering her, she wanted to get it out in the open. She wanted to deal with it. She didn't want to let anything fester and grow. Let's deal with it.
Okay.
So in that timeline, the things that I uncovered is there was some infidelity in her marriage, and her husband was seeing another woman. And knowing Kathy's personality, she wasn't just going to let that go. She was going to have to deal with it. So I'm looking at, did she deal with it that evening, the next morning? There just was a lot of discrepancies in the stories then that began to come out in those 12 hours and the 6 hours that followed that time frame. She didn't show up for work. 2 hours after that, alarms began to go off amongst her friends. They knew something was wrong. An intuition, call it what it might be, but they knew something was seriously wrong, because she would never not show up or not let someone know. Yeah. The police were notified, but they would not take a missing persons report. They said they would have to wait 24 hours, which I mentioned in my book is somewhat of a fallacy.
It is, for sure.
Those first 24 hours are so critical. But 24 hours passed, police report was filed, and yet another 48 hours transpired before any contact was made by the police with the husband, with her friends, with anybody.
Right. And her car was eventually found somewhere in all that. Her car was eventually found.
Yep. Almost, again, probably within 48 hours, 72 hours after her being reported missing, they found her car close to the hospital, within blocks of the hospital where she worked. The car's driver's seat was pushed all the way back, too far back for Kathy to have driven the car. The mirrors, the outside mirrors on the car, the rear view mirrors were adjusted for that seat being pushed so far back. The police photographed the car at the scene where it was found and then immediately released it to her husband. They didn't impound it. They didn't check it for any bodily fluids, any signs of a struggle. They should have done a forensic search on that car. They did not do it. So I made mention of that there were just some mistakes made from day one going in the investigation on Katherine Ray Gregory.
Right. And we have to remember, just so everybody knows, with Katherine and the other women we're talking about today, all these disappearances are still unsolved. I want to ask you about the police. In my opinion, in reading the book, this really was a large part of the section with Kathy's disappearance. When we talk about police mistakes, and I think maybe you listed at least 3 major issues, like you just said now. Do you think, in looking back at it now, would you say these are mistakes that keep this case still unsolved in 2025? Were they that bad, or how would you characterize these mistakes?
I think what these mistakes did is they hindered future investigations. This missing persons report was handed off as a cold case to detectives that came along years later. And even those folks would say, as they got into the files, they were extremely disappointed at how thin the files were and how disorganized they were. And the mistakes that were made, not impounding the car, not taking a police report immediately, not beginning to ask questions and go out and find her, not looking into why was that seat pushed so far back. So there's every appearance that Kathy did not park that car where they found it. Somebody parked that car probably to throw the police off, or not knowing what to do with it. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions that could still be answered. And I don't know if that's going to lead to her discovery, but there's a lot of things that still can happen and should happen.
Okay. All right. So once again, we've touched upon that. Like I said, we're just going to take nibbles for the audience out there. We're just taking nibbles at a few of these points. The rest of it, of course, we want you to go get the book. Let's move on to this. This is something that I didn't know. Of course, I knew about Kathy's disappearance. This is something, though, that I don't think I read anywhere else until I saw it in your book. There's her husband had bought a gun not long before she went missing. Just in general, tell listeners a little bit about that.
So the Ray family hired a private investigator. They became a little bit frustrated with the process or lack of process that they were seeing with the police department. So they hired their own private investigator within weeks after Kathy disappeared. The private investigator is the one who began to discover the discrepancies. And one thing he learned is that a .30-30 rifle had been purchased 2 days before Kathy disappeared. He notified the police. He worked closely with them and to help them solve this thing as quickly as possible. The police were not aware of the rifle, of which they then looked into. The rifle purchase, her husband did not inform Kathy that he had bought the rifle. And there could be many reasons for that. It was never explained. He could be anti-gun. His purpose, they wanted to know why did you buy it? His purpose was he wanted to start hunting. Some of the fellas he worked with hunts. The price of meat was going up. He just thought it would be a good idea. But he had hidden the gun in the basement of their home, along with the shells. The police, upon learning of that, again, did not confiscate the gun. They should have confiscated it upon learning about it, test fired it, examined it for had it been fired at all since the time it was bought, and was there any history on that gun. They would do ballistic test on that to find out if the gun had any history or something that might tie it to another crime. So they didn't do that. Another 2 or 3 weeks passed before they asked for the rifle. They did determine it had not been fired since it was purchased.
Okay. All right. So maybe there's something there, but at least scientifically here in 2025, there sounds like there's nothing there if they determine. But guns can be cleaned. I'm a little bit of a gun person myself, not an expert in that type of rifle. But, the longer you wait, the more it's going to look like the gun has never been fired, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, too much time went by.
Yeah, right.
Today, even years later, and in other places, that would not have happened.
Okay. We should say, if anybody doesn't know, like a .30-30, it's kind of a hunting gun. I know a lot of people these days may think about AR-15s and think this is something that your average hunter might use to go out and shoot game, deer and things like that. Whereas maybe AR-15s and others, more self-defense types of weapons, if anybody is unsure about what a .30-30 is. Okay, so we have this gun. Maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing. Her husband did buy it. We always have to take a look at husbands in situations like this. We're not saying he did anything, but a woman goes missing, a gun gets bought. Not long before that, you got to talk about it. Let's move on to this, though. Something you also mentioned, that the husband, eventually he and this woman admitted that they were having an affair and that Kathy seemingly knew about it. Let's talk about this other woman. You do use her name in the book. I'm going to try to avoid that here. But to your knowledge over the years, did she ever change her story about her relationship to Kathy's husband? What can you say about her?
The Kathy suspected something was going on, and she confided that in one of her friends, and her friend then told the detective that Kathy had expressed this concern when the detectives came around and began inquiring of friends and relatives. The detectives asked that question of the husband. He denied it, and they kept bringing it up over the course of several weeks, and they did learn eventually who the other woman was. They did interview her. They had an in-depth interview with her. They tried to keep it discreet as possible. They said to avoid any repercussions at work, and obviously did not intend to have any harm. So they say any harm happened to Kathy. The thing that is somewhat concerning here is that we as people, we do things sometimes very selfishly, and there's a lot of negativity involved in it, and it brings bad things about. And I say that through personal experience. In the book I wrote on my family members, there was a very selfish incident that occurred with my cousin's husband. He did not commit the crime, but his selfishness put everything in motion that got two people killed. And so Kathy was aware of this, and I'm sure she wasn't just going to accept it and go on with things the way they were. So the things that were happening put something in motion. And I think that's why there's still a lot of unanswered questions here. But they eventually were hounded enough by the police that they had to come forth and say what had happened.
Okay.
And it to the affair.
Okay. I have to ask, since we stated very early on that you talked to so many people, did you try to reach out to this person here in the writing of this book, this woman?
I did not try to reach out to her. I read the story. What I read about her, I think she felt awful. At the same time, she kind of led to Kathy's discomfort and all of the heartbreak that Kathy was going through at the same time. I mean, it takes two. So I kind of left her alone on that point. I did make every effort to reach out to the husband.
Okay.
I've sent him text messages and phone messages, and even told him who I am, and I just want to clear up some of the discrepancies. It'd be really helpful, but he does not want to talk to me.
Okay. But we can't, so you didn't try to reach out to her. Do we even know if she's even alive here in 2025? Did you even look that up?
I did have a conversation with the Spokane Police Department, and they did confirm they had talked to her a couple of times over the last several years. The last one may have been as much as 10 years ago, but right. They do keep tabs on her and the husband.
Okay. Speaking of him, kind of combining the two, did they continue to have a relationship? Do you even know? Did this come up in your research? Did they continue to have a relationship like a long time, let's say 6 months or a year after Kathy's disappearance? Or Did it break up? Did they end up getting married? Do you know what happened with the two of them?
The relationship did continue, and no, they did not get married, and the relationship did end after a period of time. I don't think it was very long. Not very long at all. The husband did relocate out of the Spokane area. The woman is still in the area.
Okay. Now, once again, his name is mentioned in the book, and if anybody wants to know who he is, of course, you can buy the book. But the husband, how do I put it? A little bit prominent in that area. And do you know, given Kathy's disappearance, how much did he use his position to try to spread the word on his wife's disappearance? Do we know anything about that?
No, I don't know how active he was in spreading the information of the disappearance. What he had told the police and Kathy's friends is they shouldn't be concerned about it. When he was first notified, he told them that she probably just forgot that she had a work shift that day and is out and about running errands. That also raised red flags amongst her friends, that they knew her better than that and she wouldn't forget. He did make a comment to the police after they found the car that he had hoped that she had just decided to go to California and visit her folks, and even that led to more questions. Has she ever done that before? Why would she do that? What would prompt her to want to just up and leave and go visit her folks in California as winter was encroaching in our area?
Right. I guess what I'm saying is he had access to, let's just say, mass communications. This is, of course, before the internet, but he had the access to, he could access a lot of people all at one time, and there was never an announcement, hey, my wife's missing, here's what she looks like, here's her name, anything like that, to your knowledge.
Not to my knowledge. Not other than what the police did was not a lot. But one of Kathy's friends, who is in the book also, her best friend, the one she grew up with and lived here in Spokane, she did the most. She would not let the story go away, and she kept it active, and she did fundraisers, and she would not let that story die.
And the husband still alive today in 2025, you believe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So there we go. That's at least a little bit on Katherine Gregory's disappearance. And I'm going, by the way, everybody should know, I'm going in the order in which they are covered in the book. So Kathy's was number one, the one that Doug wrote about first. And I just want to reiterate something. You tried to reach out to the husband, so his point of view could be included in the book, and he declined to talk to you.
Never responded to me.
Never responded. Okay. Let's move on to Deborah Swanson. Now, the way I understand it, this probably might be the one that feels the most personal to you, since it happened, in an area that you kind of, I guess, were responsible for. Is that how you felt about it, writing about it? And did it take you back to when she went missing? Back to the 80s.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you can relive that in the moment as I research this. I'll give you just a little bit of trivia information. Please. Here. People were hearing that I was writing about these 4 women, and I was invited to the Sunrise Rotary Club in December of last year. And I told them I'll come, but I'm not going to talk in great detail. I'll introduce these women to you and give you a little bit of background, but I don't want to go into a lot of detail. But what I did tell them is that if Debbie Swanson were here, she would be sitting amongst those Rotarians today. She would have made just a great person to have been involved in a club like that. She was so outgoing, so much energy, so much love for everything she did. She was just a perfect fit. Debbie was born and raised in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. She had 10 siblings, big family. She always wanted to be a school teacher. Her mother had commented one time that Debbie would line dolls up and hold classes with them. And she pursued that. She got her degree in Minnesota and took one of her first jobs out here in the Pacific Northwest. It was in Deer Park, Washington. And then she went to St. Mary's, Idaho, about 40 miles south of us. And then she had been working for the Coeur d'Alene School District for 2 years before she went missing. And she was just an outdoor activist. Her passion that she would talk about, second only to teaching, was engaging the environment. She loved to hike and ski and camp.
And that's why she was in the Mountaineers Club that we're going to talk about here in a moment, right? That was the Mountaineers Club.
That was the Mountaineers Club, and she learned about the Mountaineers when she was teaching in Deer Park, Washington. So she'd been a member of the club for a while.
Okay, interesting. Let's now go over the facts as best we can tell for the disappearance, and then we'll kind of backtrack to some of the things that happened right before that. But for that day, and maybe I should even ask you this: do you personally remember that day?
No, I do not remember that day.
Okay.
Well, I don't remember the incident of that day. Going back and looking at it, of course I do. There was a lot happening in our town at that time. Okay. We have a facility well known as the Coeur d'Alene Resort that was under construction and feverishly being worked on to be completed that year. Tubbs Hill is a very prominent location that people like to go to. It was late March, and the weather it just broke in everybody's favor. It had been a beautiful week, not warm, but not cold. And people were just out and about enjoying the scenery and the views. And, of course, Tubbs Hill draws quite a few people just for the hiking experience. So that day, she had made some plans to do a little bit of shopping. She was supposed to be in St. Mary's, where she had taught. She was meeting with some of her colleagues there for an Easter Sunday dinner. And after she went shopping, she decided to go on a hike up on Tubbs Hill. It was early afternoon, approximately 3:30 p.m., and she went up on the hill, and that's the last anyone had ever seen of her.
Right. And there is, if anybody's wondering, well, did she really go up there? There is somebody who actually knew her, who saw her walking up there, right?
She ran into two of her students.
Wow.
One of them was one of her students. Another one was a student at her school. They saw her as she was accessing the hill, and then eventually the students' parents came around. They were a little bit behind the kids, and so the parents, students, they all confirmed having seen her that afternoon. And then as we get into this, we'll learn that years later, almost 30 years later, there may very well be an eyewitness to her disappearance.
Okay, certainly want to talk about that. I guess what we're saying here is sometimes, as you would probably suspect, Doug, we have cars that are parked places, and you start wondering, was the person really there, or did somebody ditch the car? Even like what we talked about with Katherine Gregory. But there seems to be very, in a solid report, Deborah did park her car there, and she was there, and she did walk up into this park known as Tubbs Hill.
Yeah, I think we can say that factually, that she parked there and was planning to hike around Tubbs Hill.
Okay. Now, everybody should know that Doug did give me a map that's going to be accessible to everybody Of course, he's from there. He worked there. I don't think anybody can do a better map than Doug has done, given his history. So everybody can take a look at that. But for the listeners, Doug, explain Tubbs Hill. Is it a popular place? How many people do you think would be in the park at that particular time that Deborah was going in there? What kind of reputation does Tubbs Hill have as a park? What can you say about it being that you're very familiar with it?
Tubbs Hill, and you'll learn this in the book, I gave some background about it, but that is a 160-acre natural park area that sits on the north shore of Lake Coeur d'Alene, with the lake on the west, the south, and the east sides of it, and downtown Coeur d'Alene is abutted to the north side of Tubbs Hill. It is probably something that most communities would love to have. It's phenomenal that it's in the heart of the downtown area and sits right on the lake. It's has some pretty rugged terrain. It has a well planned out and designed footpath that goes around. This is a 2-mile pathway that goes all the way around the hill, and there are some side trails that skirt up and over the hill and in different areas and down to the different shorelines. It has the west side of the hill gets most of the sunshine. It is, I guess, less dense than the east side of the hill, where it gets less sunshine, more moisture, and a lot more undergrowth on that side of the hill, where I think this disappearance incident occurred.
Okay. As far as Tubbs Hill and regarding any sort of violence, stalking, anything like that, over your years living there, do you have stories of, I guess mainly women, but it could be men too, or in children, people being attacked in the park? For example, nationally, maybe everybody knows about Rachel Morin, who went for a jog in a park, got attacked, murdered. That guy was eventually caught. Tubbs Hill known as being a pretty safe place, or has it had some, incidents like that over the years?
Very safe place. It's family oriented. Here's the thing about Tubbs Hill is that it's so popular. Today it might get maybe 80,000 people a year that might hike around it. The thing about Tubbs Hill is if you went up there with ill intentions, you don't know who's coming around the next corner from either direction. And so there's relatively no problems. The cops might get called out there because somebody was concerned about a dog being off a leash. The problems associated with it are extremely minor. Very, very safe place to go. We have had people fall and had to be extricated off the hill, sometimes by helicopter, sometimes taken down to the shoreline, removed by boat. But those are tripping accidents, and it does happen. It's a natural park area. Right. We tell people, be careful, and it is a safe place to visit, and people of all ages use it.
All right, because I think I don't know what it was like in the 80s, but now I think sometimes when people think public parks, they might think homeless people. They might think of places, where drug deals might be going down, things like that. And you're saying, even to this day, Tubbs Hill not like that?
Not like that.
Okay. Very good. All right, so we have to keep that in that context as we think about Deborah's disappearance. Going into this park, and something happened. So here's where we get to the specific points I want to talk about. Now, of course, somebody we haven't talked about yet because he hasn't been relevant is Will Parks. Everybody knows his name from when John Paulos was on talking about Julie Weflen. But let's talk about Will Parks in relation to Deborah Swanson. These two knew each other, didn't they?
They knew each other through the Mountaineer Club. Both of them were members. They probably were not that familiar with one another. I think they just had crossed paths. They probably were aware they were both members. The part that became most interesting is both of them attended a party for the Mountaineer Club the night before she went missing. And that's when the story became real intriguing with regards to Will Parks.
Right.
There were about 20 people at that party, of which the Coeur d'Alene detective Carl Berg had tracked down and talked to most of them. And they all confirmed that Will Parks and Debbie Swanson had engaged in conversation. Will Parks and Debbie Swanson had danced at that party the night before. But when the detective contacted Will Parks, he refused to talk to him about anything.
Mm-hmm.
He denied knowing Debbie Swanson and denied having had any contact with her. Well, the detective knew better. He had 20 witnesses, so that wasn't going over well. And the one thing that the common thread in most of these stories, as people were contacted by law enforcement, too often they weren't forthcoming. And more often than not, law enforcement already has the answer to the question they're asking you. So to not give them what they want to hear, you're shedding a bad light on yourself. They're going to keep coming at you with more questions.
Right.
So that's what happened with Will Parks. He refused to meet with them. The Coeur d'Alene detective contacted the host of the party and asked him to intervene. He goes, one of your party guests just doesn't want to talk to me. I just need to put him at ease. I need to clear him from any concerns and just find out what he knows, what they talked about. So the individual called Will Parks, and he got the same response. Will Parks just kind of unloaded on him and refused to talk to him about it and refused to talk to the police. So that put a spotlight on him.
Right.
The police did learn that Will Parks, the following day, Saturday, the day that Debbie Swanson went missing, had gone skiing at one of our ski resorts. At that time, it was called Silverhorn. Today, it's called Silver Mountains, about 40 miles east of us. But he had gone skiing there that day and abruptly left around noon. Having left there at noon would put him back in Coeur d'Alene prior to the time Debbie Swanson went missing. So those are the things they have to clear up that he would never talk to them about.
Right.
So his demeanor was such that as the story grew and more attention came upon him, even in another disappearance,
right,
it was his personality. If a person can be their own worst enemy, Will Parks was his own worst enemy.
Yeah. And it should be known to remind everybody, Will Parks is dead. It seems that while driving, he choked on something that he was eating and died. And eventually that's why John Paulus appeared in 2020, because until that point, John was worried about any defamation charges that might come against him if he appeared on Unfound. And it was with Will Parks' death that John finally said, oh yeah, I'll come on and talk about Julie. And of course, we'll get more to that in a little bit. As far as anybody can tell, did Deborah tell anybody that she was going to Tubbs Hill that day?
I have to think about that for a second. It seems to me there were a few people that knew she had wanted to take a hike around Tubbs Hill. Whether she said specifically, I'm going up at this time, no, I don't think that's known.
Okay. Because we have to consider, if she might have mentioned something at the party, maybe I don't know whether Will Parks did this or not. But we can theorize or conjecture if she did mention something about going to Tubbs Hill. Yeah, he went skiing, but he knew she was going to be there. Did he end up there as well? Because it gets a little hard to figure. If nobody knew she was going to be there, then was this just some random encounter if she indeed got abducted? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the listeners know I'm not a big believer in dogs. I really, for the most part, don't know how much they help. But they were used in trying to find her. And what did, that park was anybody I could ever talk to about her disappearance. What did the dogs do in the park? What idea did people get from their actions?
So here's part of the problem with Debbie's disappearance is she went missing on Saturday, and on Sunday she didn't attend a dinner party that she was scheduled to be at. On Monday, she missed another event, and it wasn't until Tuesday, 3 days after she had already gone up on Tubbs Hill, that one of her neighbors saw her car in the Tubbs Hill parking lot. She was concerned about it. She's the one who notified the police. The police checked it out. So more than 72 hours had passed since Debbie went missing. And once the police found the car, went to the house, they couldn't find anything that suggested foul play or why she was missing, any indication, any suggestions as to why she was missing. But by the fourth and fifth day, they had launched a pretty extensive search of Tubbs Hill and the surrounding areas. The search included search and rescue dogs. The police created a grid pattern up and over that entire hill. They used cadets from the Air Patrol. They used volunteers. And they went across that hill looking for anything they could find, including the dogs going first, trying to pick up a scent. A helicopter was brought in with infrared equipment that could have picked up body heat, but maybe not that long after something had happened. But at the end of the day, the detective said, we know she's not on Tubbs.
Not on Tubbs Hill.
That was their conclusion. By Friday the following week, 6 days after she had disappeared, they concluded she's not on Tubbs Hill.
Okay. The going back to the dogs for a moment, did the dog say, well, she went out some other, of course she could have been being dragged or something out of there. Did the dog show that she could have exited another part of the park? Is that even possible? I'm going to get into theoreticals here in a moment, but the dogs, how far did they go? Do you remember?
No, there's a lot of access points and places you can get off the hill, a lot.
Okay.
The dogs did not hit on anything.
Okay. That brings me to these theoreticals. I'll just ask you what is right in the outline that we're following for this interview. And by the way, we're doing this on June 25th of 2025 for everybody listening. Theoretically, could someone, Will Parks or not, have abducted Deborah on that Saturday and nobody have seen it? You being there, you're being familiar with how many times it gets visited and what people do. Is it conceivable that somebody or a group could have gone in there and taken Deborah out with anybody seeing?
Yes, it is possible.
Okay. How possible? Like 90% possible or just like 50% possible? Once again, you being the expert on that location.
I'd say it's much greater than 50% if that was a person's intention. And on the map that I sent you, it kind of showed where I think this abduction took place. And we weren't aware of this. The police weren't aware of it. This came about almost 30 years after she was abducted. Another student was on the hill with her stepdad. And a confrontation took place that the student reported to the police between the stepdad and Debbie Swanson. Right. The student reported that she hadn't reported, she was being abused. And what she told me, and she told the police later, is that looking back on it, she's pretty sure that Debbie Swanson knew that she was being abused. It's like a sixth sense that a teacher or a woman has, that they know those things. But she said a confrontation broke out, a very heated confrontation broke out between her stepdad and Debbie Swanson, and the student was ordered by the stepdad to go back to the car and wait. And she was a little concerned about that. She didn't know if she could find her way, and he demanded that she leave. She did go back. She left the hill, and it was the dad came down. She did not notice anything about him. She didn't look for any scratches or anything. They just went home. He dropped her off and left again. He didn't come back for 6 or 8 hours that day. So as I look at what happened and how Debbie Swanson would have accessed the hill, I can see that Debbie took a counterclockwise tour around the hill, and the student and her dad took a clockwise tour, but they entered more from the east side because the student said that she immediately lost sight of the Coeur d'Alene Resort. The Coeur d'Alene Resort is visible on the west side all the way out to the south end of the hill. But she immediately lost sight, and you lose sight of it on the south and east side right away. The hill blocks everything. So as they came around, that's probably where they encountered one another, towards the northeast corner of the hill. Very dense in vegetation in that area. If something happened, I don't think, looking at it, that there was any intent to do harm. I think something triggered a response. He may have hit her. She may have tried to walk away and he grabbed her. I don't know. But if he did knock her out or kill her at that moment, he could have drugged the body into some undergrowth and then went back to get it.
All right. That's conceivable, possible. Certainly doesn't defy any laws of physics. And it's certainly possible something could have happened. And of course, if they're not looking for her for a few days, he could go back, that night, take her body out under the cover of darkness, and nobody would know. Now we should say this is not Will Parks. This guy you're talking about is not Will Parks.
That is not Will Parks. No.
Do you know this person's name?
I do.
All right. Do not mention it here. But have you did you try to contact him for the purposes of writing your book? Have you looked him up? Does he have a criminal record? Any history of violence? Anything like that?
Yes, he does have a history of violence, and I confirmed all this with the student and the student's mother. The individual died also, and that's unfortunate that he did, because he really needs to be questioned. When the police learned of all of this, they really did some extensive work to try to find out what happened. Yeah. He had left the area shortly after all of this occurred. His wife at that time had divorced him, and I can't remember if he went to Texas or to Florida, but that's where he died around 2019, I think. Mm. What the police did is they determined the car that he owned at that time. They went through all the registrations, all the sales and purchases of that car. They wanted to find it, even after all of these years, hoping that they could extract something from it. They tracked that car all the way to through every owner, which I think there were 4 or 5 different owners over the course of those years. They tracked it all the way to what's called Spalding Automotive in Spokane, Washington. Spokane Automotive confirmed that the car, they did buy the car, and then they looked into it, and the car was dismantled, crushed, and gone.
Wow.
So the police weren't able to get anything from it.
Wow. How old was this student at the time? Do you remember?
10 years old at the time.
Old. Did she, given, of course, if she says she's being abused, she would certainly understand what abuse is. So does she remember how the argument, being that she was standing there, how did this argument even start? What memory did she have about how it started?
She didn't recall how it started. What she did recall is how angry her stepdad became. And what she relayed to me is that Debbie Swanson must have said something to the dad about, I know what you're doing. I know what you've been. And that set it in motion.
Okay. What would be interesting to know, and I think it's probably, I know it's not covered in the book, but it's just something that comes to mind. It would be interesting to know, teachers who worked with Deborah, did they know this as well? For example, did Deborah ever say something to a colleague, Jane Doe, the 10-year-old Jane Doe, I think her father's abusing her. This would be something that would be interesting to know. That would certainly then give a lot of credence to what you've set up here. Did, something go on?
And that's really interesting because schools usually know those things.
Yeah.
Could have been dealing with it on a separate issue and never made the connection as to what was going on, and nobody looked into it until the student brought it up years later.
Right. Okay. So everybody, that is the disappearance of Deborah Swanson. Like I said, we're just kind of doing a little bits and pieces. I know it seems like we're being quite in-depth, but I can assure you there's way more in the book regarding all of this for both Katherine Gregory and Deborah Swanson's disappearance. Let's now move on to Sally Stone. Now, I will admit that this was the one that was the least familiar to me, although I had certainly heard about it. I think it's the stale donuts part of this that really sticks with you after something you don't run into stale donuts and disappearances too often. Probably that's why it's in my mind at all. Let's talk about Sally Stone. What are the general facts of her disappearance, Doug?
So Sally Stone, this is a very unfortunate incident, and Sally Stone lived somewhat of a tumultuous life. She grew up in the Santa Rosa, California area. She was adopted at about 3 months of age, and shortly after that, she was kidnapped. And massive search ensued. They found her a couple days later in the Los Angeles area in a restroom, in a women's restroom in a bar. And she had been abducted by her biological mother. And they found her. Of course, she had to deal with that, but she was returned to her adopted parents. And they raised her, took care of her, and she just kind of kept drifting away from their values. And the mother commented on this at one time, that she said there's two sides to Sally Stone, and she doesn't always understand her. But Sally became pregnant at the age of 15. She gave the baby up for adoption. And at around 18 or 19, she moved out and came up here to North Idaho. She settled in the Sandpoint area, where she met her husband, a fella that I think she had lived with a group of people for a while. They got married, and some of the things that I've read is even that was a tumultuous relationship that went back and forth. She was an exotic dancer at one of the nightclubs at State Line, Idaho, just about 8 miles west of Coeur d'Alene. And one night she was injured. She was dancing, fell, and she did some damage to her knee, her ACL. And that took her off of the dancing stage for a while. She was in physical therapy for almost 6 months. In the interim, of during those 6 months, a couple of the patrons, that frequented the nightclub, offered her the opportunity to stay with them until she could get back on her feet. She took that opportunity, and they let her stay there rent free. And she was going to a physical therapist on a regular basis. On this particular day, she went there. She stopped at a place called Davis Donuts on her way back to her house. She bought some donuts. She went home, parked her car in front of the house, and that was the last anybody ever heard of her. A long time had gone by, more than several days, maybe the better part of a week. Her husband called the Coeur d'Alene Police Department. He was in prison in Ada County down in southern Idaho in the Boise area for grand theft auto. It was coming up on Memorial Day, and she had planned to go down there and visit him. She didn't make it, so he called for a courtesy check, and the police went to the house, found her car. They found, of course, mail at the house that had been unopened. She had been getting workers' compensation checks. They found 2 checks that were uncashed. And in the car, they found her sack of stale donuts. And again, other than that, they found no signs of foul play. She was just missing. Nothing they could find missing of her personal property other than her purse. Her purse and car keys were gone.
Huh. It's very interesting. I'm kind of just noticing this now. All 4 of these disappearances, these women's vehicles play a huge role in these disappearances. And all 4 of these, I'm just kind of, it's one of these things you're sitting listening, you're like, oh yeah, all 4. You know, of course we'll get to Julie's, but it wasn't technically her vehicle, but I think everybody knows what I mean here. That these vehicles seem to provide some evidence of something.
They found nothing that they could get a significant lead off of. Some of their interviews led them to question what happened to her uniform. She had a dance uniform, and they could not find those in the house. 6 months had gone by since she last danced. So she could have loaned them out. She could have given them away. It's hard to say what happened to those, but those were the only things they could not find.
Right, and so she's an exotic dancer. They all have their own costumes. They have to buy them themselves, and of course they take them home. They have to wash them and whatever else. And what we're saying is, after, when they went into her stuff, none of her stripping stuff could be found.
Couldn't be found. No.
Okay.
There had been rumors from some of the folks at the nightclub that she had left the area and gone to Canada and was doing the dance circuit up there. That didn't pan out, and the Coeur d'Alene police did contact all the Canadian authorities to be on the lookout. They found nothing of any person of interest up there that matched anything Sally Stone had. Plus, she left her car, she left her uncashed checks, and all of her personal clothing. Everything she had to have to sustain herself was still in her house. So that theory kind of went away.
Right. Now, she was divorcing. Now, her husband's in jail. He's in there on a crime, so I guess he has as good an alibi as you can, except for maybe being dead. But she was going to divorce him. That was in her plans.
She had already started divorce proceedings and had hired an attorney and was going through the process. She held up on the final papers until she could meet with him, which she planned to do in Boise, and tell him personally and hand him the papers rather than do it coldly through the mail.
Okay. All right. So just to be very clear on this, at the time of her disappearance, was her husband, who was in jail, aware that she was going to divorce him?
She had told him.
She had told him already. All right, so
Yeah,
we have to figure that into this. But on the other hand, he was the one who called it in from jail.
Yeah. He had asked her do not proceed with the divorce. Give me another chance. He did not want to do it, but I think her mind was made up.
Okay. Now, something that catches two things, but we'll go to the first one. May 17th and 18th, no information at all on Sally at all. So seemingly, once again, perceptually, something surely could be different factually, but she gets home, seemingly, I don't know, forgets to take the donuts out, or maybe she's confronted as soon as she parks her car. That could happen. But there were a couple days in there before the husband did anything, so we have no information on Sally for the 17th or 18th.
No information at all. She had a scheduled physical therapy appointment on the 19th, and of course she did not show up for that.
Right.
So dates now are starting to come together. Last time she was seen was the 16th, and no one heard from her again from that point on.
Okay. You got to speak to the police regarding Sally's disappearance?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Is there perception then that she really was the person who drove her own car home? In contrast, of course, her car being staged. Somebody else, something happened somewhere else and somebody else parked it there. Thus, the donuts get left in the car. But their best understanding, they think she really did drive her own car home?
Yes.
Interesting. So either something happened right as she got home, or she went inside and something happened and she forgot the donuts were in the car. Something like that.
Or somebody was there already. Somebody she knew. They were inside. He asked her, or they asked her to go with them. And you're probably right. She maybe forgot about the donuts at that point. She grabbed her purse and off they went, and she never returned.
Okay. Were they ever able to determine... I'm sorry, Doug. Please continue. Please continue.
Or it was something more nefarious than that. Maybe somebody that had stalked her and was waiting for her, forced her into a car and took off. We just don't know what happened at that point.
Any allegations that she had another man? I mean, they're getting divorced. Maybe it's because he was in jail all the time. I guess we don't know. But any allegations that she had a new man in her life while he was in jail?
I don't think she had anybody she was seeing regularly, but I think she had other men in her life.
Okay. Now, I really debated, we kind of exchanged messages, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway, even though I don't want to get into any names, even though there are names in the book. She was very familiar with her next door neighbor, was she not?
What do you mean by that?
Well, she did some babysitting for a neighbor.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it was the next door neighbor. It might have been. The next door neighbor was a police officer.
Right.
And that was really interesting about Sally, who has, it might be her background that caused her not to get a lot of attention on this.
Yeah.
But people that knew her had an enormous amount of trust for her. And a police officer, again, is somebody that has a really good feeling for that when they talk to somebody, whether or not they can trust them. And the police officer's wife, it was, a woman can really read another woman very well. They trusted Sally to babysit their child. And I think that spoke volumes on Sally's character. I think Sally is someone who had a really good intentions. She was just caught up in the wrong environment and had a hard time getting out.
Okay. Any news, if we're to understand that Sally really drove her own car home and something went on, anybody ever come forward? I heard something, I saw something, there was somebody hanging out at Sally's house before she came home. Any stories that you encountered in all the questioning you did for this part of the book?
There are actually lots of stories, things that I couldn't corroborate, and I tried with all due diligence. Things that came from Sally's father and the work that he was putting in behind the scenes, but I just couldn't validate any of it. He believes Sally was abducted here and is still here, but dead and buried.
Okay. And we do have to remember Sally was physically handicapped at that point with this knee injury.
She had a bad knee. Yeah, right. They chose not to do surgery, but chose physical therapy, which takes a little bit more time, but it would strengthen it. And, she was losing the brace and the crutches, and she was coming along just fine. It was one of the few times, quite often when she went to physical therapy, the folks that she had been staying with, that wife of that individual would take her to physical therapy. Once she moved out of their house into Coeur d'Alene, she was driving herself about.
Okay. But I guess what I'm saying is if she encountered some attacker outside her home, she wouldn't be able to run away.
No, she probably would not run away.
All right, so maybe the attacker knew that, if somebody was somebody who knew her. And of course, she had been laid up for quite a while at that point. Okay, so that's Sally Stone's disappearance. So we now come to the one that I know the best simply because John Poulos was the guest 5 years ago, and I've known about Julie's disappearance for a long time before I ever started this podcast. It is certainly a rare, in some ways, a very rare disappearance. Woman out working, of course, for an electric company, and something happened where she gets abducted. I don't know if we need to get into all the facts. Once again, 5 years ago, we got deep into the facts. Just suffice to say, she was kind of volunteered, I guess, almost, to stop at this electrical station. There's something going on there. Do some work there. Something during that time happened that she got abducted. There's no doubt about that. There were actually even drag marks in the gravel. And still all these years later, this happened in 1987, they're still looking for what happened there. And then this is where Will Parks' name, I think, came up. Did these two know each other or not? And I think we're eventually going to get into that. But those are the general facts. Like I said, we've got deep into them. So I'm just going to go to these important items. I think some things that I don't think maybe John and I touched upon when he did such a great job 5 years ago. Let's first talk about this dump truck driver. You have this written in your book. What did this guy see? Did he come forward quickly with his story? What can you say?
So what I learned about this dump truck driver was largely I learned it from John Poulos.
Right.
What he had done, and this guy was also a former police officer, so he had some background. And he was leaving an area, heading in the opposite direction of what he said was a van coming in his direction. What he saw was a man and a woman vigorously fighting in that van, enough so that it got his attention. He's in a dump truck. He said, I'm going to turn around. I'm going to follow them. So by the time he got that dump truck turned around, he lost that vehicle. He did not have, he wasn't sure about the make, the model, the color, and he certainly did not see the license plate. But he went home and he told his wife what he saw, and it was his wife who said, you need to notify the police.
Right.
He notified the Spokane County Sheriff, told them what he saw, and they had no information to go on other than that.
Right. And this was surely in the area where Julie was abducted.
Same road, same location, right?
Okay.
Real close to where the substation is at.
And I guess we have to remember, if he's in a dump truck, they're in a vehicle. I mean, the time it takes to turn around a dump truck and everything, I mean, the car is going to be miles down the road. The odds of catching, unless you have a Corvette, I mean, you're not going to catch it.
It's 2-lane road. It's going to take him a little longer to turn around.
Right. It's going to be really, really tough. So we have to keep that in mind. So I'm not saying he didn't see anything, but certainly I can understand if he tried to turn around and track the person down, I can understand why he was unsuccessful. Okay. Have you actually... Please, Doug.
The thing about his story is that it puts more than one person in that arena of being an abductor. There was the driver and then the man and the woman fighting. So there were two men.
Okay. Right. And that caught his attention. Okay. Okay. Have you actually, moving on to the next, I want to get your opinion on something. You have actually been to the spot where she was abducted?
I have been to the spot many times. I have gone to all of the locations of all 4 of these women and walked the sites on numerous occasions.
Fantastic. Great job, Doug. Great job. So I want to ask you a question, being that I've only ever been to the spot through Google Streets. In your opinion, if somebody was driving by there that day, would that person have been able to notice if the electrical worker there was a man or a woman? In your opinion, just somebody, just normal speed limit driving by, how much is it in view? Your opinion?
It's right off of the road. I mean, the gate to that substation might be 30 feet off of the road. The substation yard itself is pretty big.
Yeah.
Driving by, if she's wearing a hard hat, and probably the clothes that go along with what the Bonneville Power Administration employees wear, I would say driving by 45, 50 miles an hour, which I think is the speed limit, that area, I think it would be very hard to say with certainty if it was a man or a woman.
Yeah, somebody might notice that, the truck's there, somebody's working there, but maybe you'd have to be driving a lot slower or actually stop in there to be able to tell whether it was a man or a woman working there.
Yeah, I think it would tell.
Okay. In addition, once again, being that you've been there, would a person driving by be able to automatically tell whether there was one person working there, 2, 3 people, or not?
Again, I don't think somebody driving by and randomly thinking that would know. I think it would be hard to tell. Being that it was a minivan, they could probably deduct that it was one person.
All right. Let's move on to this then. Your opinion, once again, being that you've been there. Could Julie have been surprised? Is it big enough area that if she's like at one far end and somebody pulls in, could somebody have been surprised or not?
This is the part that makes it very interesting, because when she pulled in, what we're not 100% sure about is, did she close the gate behind her? There's some speculation she did or she didn't, which means when somebody pulled up, they had to reopen the gate and drive in. Yeah. Let's assume the gate was left open because she didn't plan on being there that long.
Right.
Even if they drove in, she would hear the vehicle coming in. It's a gravel area. She would hear the crunch of tires. She would hear the engine. So there's 2 things that went on. Either she thought somebody's pulling in here that shouldn't be here, maybe they're trying to turn around, or she recognized the vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm asking, because in your book, of course, this isn't necessarily, maybe it is your opinion, but I'm going off of what the investigator said originally, that they said, well, she must have been surprised. And I started thinking, well, even though I haven't been there, how could somebody surprise her? It's obvious that there was another vehicle there. I mean, the tire tracks are there. How could a truck pull in and she not realize that somebody was, was there? That seems Like she couldn't have been surprised that way.
I think the attack was the surprise. I don't think she was surprised by another vehicle.
Okay. So.
I think vehicle pulled in. I think a conversation occurred. Whether she knew that person or not, the conversation got out of control in a hurry. And the person overpowered her. Okay. I think the surprise came from the attack. I don't know if they attacked her from behind or head on. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when we're talking surprise, it wasn't like she didn't know anybody was there. It was more a surprise of the action that person took that she already saw.
I think the surprise was that it became very physical, and the police reports indicate that someone was knocked to the ground, which they're assuming was Julie.
Okay, let's move on. Please.
Her hard hat, her bottle, the sunglasses, things were strewn right there near her car, and not laid on the ground, but strewn on the ground.
Okay, they were. Right. Let's move on to this. This is a topic that John and I, of course, since the first time I ever talked about to John, which might have been, 2018 or something, this is a topic that we've gone round and round and round about. But you seem to have a definitive answer in your book. It has to do with the Mountaineer Club that we've already mentioned regarding Deborah Swanson. Was Julie a member or not a member of this club?
She was not a member, and neither was her husband.
Mm-hmm. So then, did she or did she not know Will Parks?
I have no indication that she had ever crossed paths with Will Parks, and the Spokane County Sheriff could not give me anything that indicated that there was any connection between the two. The thing that drew their attention was they learned about the Debbie Swanson incident and the lack of cooperation on the part of Will Parks, and how close Will Parks lived in proximity within a mile of where Julie Weflen had been abducted. And of course, Will Parks was coming to them through other sources. And he had some problems. Will Parks himself had anger issues. He had the wherewithal to commit the crime. Whether or not he did it, there's just no unequivocal connection that he had anything to do with it.
Okay. And also something, I don't want to ruin it, but there's also something that a co-worker said to Julie's family about Will Parks, correct?
Yes, and these are the types of questions that still need to be asked. Yeah. And we can find these in all of these cases, but there was shortly after, not shortly, it was many years, 20 years, almost 24 years after Julie had disappeared. That's where John Polos and his group came in, and they formed what is called the Citizens for Justice, and they wanted to know what happened to Julie and where's this case going, what's happening. So they met in the Vancouver area. Yeah. And, they met with a lot of the former BPA employees, but Julie's dad and her stepmom were there. Julie's stepmom, Joy Miner, kept notes on everything pertaining to Julie, and she did that for her husband, Bob, I believe was his name. And at this meeting, this fellow, I think his name was Falk, last name was Falk, made mention that Julie had come to him. He was a BPA supervisor, that Julie had come to him and expressed concern or fear about a Will Parks. That's the first that had ever been mentioned. That information was not relayed to the police, and it never went any further, except Julie's mom made note of it in her notes, and John Polos and another fellow, a guy named Bob Wendis, had visited with her later and saw that notation in her documents. And I wanted to see that. I wanted to get my hands on it. And I wanted to know if the police had it, which I did call the detective, Mark Henderson. He had never heard of it. But the idea, I asked Julie's stepmom what she thought of that. You know, what did you think of that when you heard that? Told me she didn't believe him. She said, there's just something there that I don't even know why he mentioned it. I did make a note of it, but I didn't believe him. And those are the things the police need to be asking questions about. Right. Why did you say that? Did you print the notes? When did it happen? What was Julie feeling or thinking? Those things need to be drawn out.
Right, and we should know Mr. Falk is deceased. John got to speak to him, but you did not.
I did not.
Okay. All right, so as best as you can tell, being that you were in the area at the time, you've written this book, you've put all this information together. Was Will Parks' name public knowledge regarding Deborah Swanson's disappearance back at the time?
That's a public knowledge. I'm going to think it was public knowledge only because of all the interest that was growing on both of these cases. Will Parks got tied to Debbie Swanson and Julie Weflen, and there were newspaper articles about the lack of cooperation from a suspect. And as you read through those articles, it's pretty easy to know who they're talking about. In addition to that, the one of the members of the Mountaineers Club had called Will Parks out in a letter to all 450 members with regards to his abrasive personality, particularly around other women, and the fact that he was being considered a person of interest by two different police departments on two different cases, that Will Parks needs to be watched, and Will Parks should probably not be a member until this gets cleared up. And there was contact made to Will Parks by a spokesman review reporter and one of the TV reporters, KXLY, I believe, who both called him to talk to him about this case, and that's where he had told them his life has become a living hell because of all of this. But he was also upset about what he felt was harassment that he was getting, which he believed were friends of Mike Weflen, Julie Weflen's husband. He was getting posters on his trees of Julie being missing, and that Will had something to do with it. But Will had the abrasiveness that just kept drawing attention to himself, and his lack of cooperation didn't help at all.
Does it bother you, if we're to believe, I mean, I don't know what, I have to admit, I don't know what to think of this, the Falk, the co-worker supervisor of Julie, brings up Will Parks' name. He says that she complained to him, but she never seemingly complained about Will Parks to anybody else. Not her husband, not her mother, not any female friends, nobody, as far as anybody knows.
There's no indication that she ever crossed paths with Will Parks or had any conversation with him anywhere. What I do know that Will did attend a church in Spokane, and I knew that Julie and her husband did. I even tried to make that connection. I went to that church and asked them if they could go back and look at their membership, and they verified that Julie and Mike were members at that time. There's no indication Will Parks ever attended there. So not even in that connection could I put those two together.
Yeah, because once again, this is just human nature. We complain about people that, I don't know if if we have one bad interaction with somebody, I don't know if we complain about somebody, but, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times the same interaction with the same person, then I can see when people would start complaining. But nobody's been able to prove that Julian and Will even met once. But here she is allegedly complaining to her supervisor about it. This would make me believe that, well, if they did have any encounters, it had to do with her work. But, I still think this is something that somebody would complain to a spouse and friends about as well. It's hard to understand.
Well, and that's the thing I think the police need to dive a little bit deeper into the BPA connections. So Julie was in her office cubicle one afternoon, and another BPA employee comes in and tells her that the nitrogen tanks are running low at the Spring Hill substation. She's the overseer. She's the supervisor of the substations. She said, I'll fix it on my way home. I'm going to go right by there. I'll take care of it. He said, it's nothing critical. It could wait till tomorrow. She said, no, I'll take care of it. We don't have to deal with it tomorrow. So what I do know is the individual that told her that was very fond of her, an older gentleman. Julie was a cute young girl. And he would bring her things, bring her donuts or coffee, whatever. I don't think there was anything there, but we have an individual who knew where Julie was going that afternoon. I don't know if there was a sign-out board or something in that office that indicated Julie Weflen checking out at 2:35 p.m. going to Spring Hill substation. I would want to know who else knew that in that org. And was there any conflicts? Those things never surfaced.
Right, and dare I say, given the time frame of the 1980s, could this? I think most people. I've talked about Julie's disappearance outside of that particular episode, and I do not think that Will Parks is responsible. I guess I could buy into it. She did something to Deborah Swanson. But the connection to Julie Weflen with Will Parks has always seemed pretty thin to me. I know John Polis thinks something else. Fine by him. I have nothing bad to say about the guy at all. I think he's done fantastic work. Just my impression. But I think about the time, I think she's a woman doing, quote-unquote, a man's job. Quote-unquote, I have the little bunny ears up beside my head so nobody gets the wrong impression. Could that have been something? A woman, going into a man's profession, once again, quote unquote, a man's profession. It's always something that comes to me. And then on top of that, I hear that the supervisor said she complained about Will Parks, but Will Parks and nobody, not you, not John, anybody who has worked on her disappearance has ever put the two of them together, especially now that we know that she's never been in the Mountaineer Club. That connection didn't exist. So, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, unless, Will Parks' close proximity where his house compound sort of place was, that he had driven by that substation enough that he recognized her. That's a stretch.
Yeah, it's a stretch. I agree.
That's a stretch. Will Parks, he had generated a lot of enemies, I guess, over the years. Most of them being women. He had issues with women. They would break off the relationships. Some of them reported those problems to the police, and in some cases he had restraining orders. He had confrontations with people. He had one physical altercation with one of his own club members. over this issue. So he had the problems. He had been in the Air Force. He did have survival training. He was very good at what he did. He was a climber. He could rappel. He could teach. He did teach people how to do that.
That was his business. Yeah.
He was a very handy with weapons. He knew all about them. He was a gun collector. He had a federal permit for firearms. I think with his personality, he would be a red flag today, that he probably shouldn't have those types of weapons because he was so volatile. The one thing that just they couldn't get Will Parks off of their list, and he did hire an attorney to talk to the police. He hired his own private investigator to help clear him. But the police told him on no uncertain terms, "Hey, listen, we want to clear you. Come in, have an in-depth interview with us, take a polygraph test, and let us search your property." He refused to do any of it. So it's, come on, help us clear you, but you don't want to help us clear you.
Yeah. Okay. I got you. I got you.
So I think, people look at that and they go, he must be guilty. But again, go ahead and connect the dots. You can't connect him.
Nope.
To Julie Weflen.
You can't do it. No. And the proximity, I get it. But there are a lot of people that lived, near that power station. I mean, I know it's not a city, but there are a lot of people who lived out in that area, that lived even closer. All right, let's move on to this. How has this affected you? I mean, this is true crime. I don't know. Were you ever interested in true crime growing up? Unsolved mysteries and all those things, 80s, 90s. What's it been like entering this world for you?
That's interesting. I would say of some of the TV shows I watch, I probably watch Forensic Files more often than anything. Okay. So I do have an interest. Not anything that was as deep as it was in this particular book. I got into this probably because as I began to know the families and the friends of the victims, I got to know the victims. Yeah. And I felt that, I would like to have known each one of them. I would like to have had them as my friends. These were some great people. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt that's where I had the passion to really keep digging into these crimes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. And once again, you being from the area, you were aware of all four of these, like just if maybe just in passing?
I was aware of the nurse, Katherine Gregory. I was not aware of hers. And that drew so little attention. That was, I don't think I ever saw it happen until I began researching these, and then Kathy's name popped up, and it popped up again, and I said, I'm gonna go down that road and see what this is all about.
Now let's move on to this. The book itself. You've finished it. Where can people find it? Then I want to talk about any other work that you've done. Please tell them the title of the book and where your book can be found. Everything that was written here. Of course, we only touched upon a little part of it. I mean, I'm telling you, everybody, there's a lot more in the book to read. Some additional facts and interviews that Doug did. But Doug, tell the listeners about the book, where it can be found.
Yes, I'll just expound on that a little bit. There's a lot more detail. I have probably over 1,000 pages of documents that I had to sort through and put together and corroborate, and notes from people that I have interviewed, and that all went into the book. So there's a lot of interesting detail in here. Mm-hmm. The book itself, it's called Vanished in the Pacific Northwest. It's the mysterious true story of 4 women who vanished without a trace. And the book right now is available on in the Amazon bookstore. You can get it in ebook, paperback, and hardcover.
Right.
And I will be distributing this to local bookstores here in the Coeur d'Alene and Spokane area. I also plan to contact Portland, Julie's hometown, and Minneapolis, Debbie's hometown, and Carmel, California, where Kathy grew up. And probably place some books there as well.
Okay. What about your other works? You talked about how you were originally asked to write a book about trails or something like that. If that book, any other work that you've done, please talk about those now as well.
So the first book I wrote was on the North Idaho Centennial Trail, the trail that almost wasn't. That was a project we started 35 plus years ago. It was a 23-mile trail. One of the biggest and most ambitious projects undertaken in this area and most of the country probably at that time. But it connected Coeur d'Alene to the state line, 23 miles along the north shore of the lake and along the Spokane River. It connected communities and schools and parks. And it met with a ton of resistance, which surprised us all, but it was a new and novel idea at that time, and people were afraid of it. They were afraid of what it might bring, trash and devaluation of property values and pedophiles and all the things they were afraid of.
Yeah.
The opposite happens. It increases property values, and it makes a safer place. So that book is also out. It's available on Amazon Books, and that's in paperback only.
Okay.
Shortly after that, I decided to memorialize a cousin and aunt of mine that died too suddenly and too violently. They were murdered in Las Vegas. They both lived in Southern California, but went to pick up an abandoned pickup that my cousin's husband owned, and he had a gambling addiction, and that got to him, and he emptied out their bank account, and he spent all their money, and he took off for Las Vegas, lost everything there, and got on a bus and went to San Francisco. It looks like his intent was to off himself, but he couldn't do it. And my cousin and my aunt were notified by the Las Vegas Police Department that they found the abandoned truck and traced it back to their address. My cousin and my aunt went to pick up the truck and encountered an individual that had just been released from an Oregon penitentiary, and he murdered both of them.
In Las Vegas?
In Las Vegas.
What year was that? I think you already know I lived in Las Vegas from 98 to 2011. What year did that happen?
That was 1964.
Oh, way back. Wow, way back.
Yeah, I remember all the impact it had on family. And what I did when I decided to memorialize them is I needed to go back and recontact all of my family that are scattered all over the country. And to this day, they all still hold a bit of animosity towards my cousin's husband for putting this event in motion.
Yeah.
It was selfish, his action, put it all in motion, that murdered two beautiful people and devastated the lives of many more.
What's the name of that book again?
That's called Closure Can Be a Myth.
Okay. And then, of course, you have this book, Vanished in the Pacific Northwest. So, big question. Do you think you're going to stay in this genre for your next project or what?
I really enjoy the research and the conversation and discussions that come with true crime stories. So I don't know. Right now, I don't have anything on the horizon. I didn't have this on the horizon. Right. So we'll see now that it's done what might pop up.
Okay. Right now, tell anybody, do you have a Facebook page set up for your projects? You maybe have a personal Facebook page, but maybe you want to stay away from that. If you have a page set up for this book or your other books or your professional life, or on Instagram, wherever else, website. Why don't you tell everybody about those locations right now, Doug?
Sure. I can be contacted on Instagram. It's all lowercase, RD underscore Eastwood, EASTWOOD. It's my Instagram address.
Okay.
I'm going to give you my email address in case somebody wants to contact me that way. And it's all lowercase, RD Eastwood 1232 at gmail.com. And of course, I'm easy to find on Facebook.
Okay. So I'm guessing Doug is like your middle name then?
Doug is my middle name, yes.
Okay. All right, guys. So I was just trying to RD. All right. So I was thinking it made sense. RD. And it's like, oh, maybe his first name starts with an R then. Okay. All right. There you go, everybody. You just heard a 2-hour interview with author Doug Eastwood regarding 4 disappearances from the 1980s in the Northwest. I know that at least 3 of them of course, with Julie, we really got deep on hers, but we've touched upon the others. You now have somebody else who has worked on these disappearances. You've kind of gotten a different point of view compared to mine, compared to John Paulus's, compared to anybody else who has looked at these disappearances. So, Doug, any final words before we complete this interview?
No, I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think I know all the family and friends that have been talking to me are going to appreciate it. I'll let them know when this might be aired so they can listen to it. Mm-hmm. They already have the book, and I know there's a comfort in knowing that somebody is still keeping this active.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. Got the book. Everybody should know, this is not a plug, like he didn't send me a free book. I bought the book myself. It's my own book. I read it, made notes in it, and certainly decided, well, we got to have Doug on to talk about it. So, Doug, thanks for appearing on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you.
And that was my June 25th, 2025 interview with Doug Eastwood, author of Vanished in the Pacific Northwest, the mysterious true story of 4 women who vanished without a trace. Please find his book on Amazon.com. I bought my own copy and I learned new information about all of these disappearances. Doug also provided a map for Deborah Swanson's disappearance. This can be found on Unfound's website, theunfoundpodcast.com. And you can also reference the original map video I did for Julie Weflen's disappearance back in 2020 on YouTube. So what to think about these 4 cases with this additional info shared by Doug in the interview and in his book? I'll take the cases as they were discussed. Katherine Gregory. So her husband was cheating on her. She found out about it. Then she went missing. And then both he and the mistress tried to keep it quiet. I see. However, I have to admit, I suppose I could be open to the idea that Katherine took off on her own just to make it look like her husband killed her. Deborah Swanson. My experience tells me to be very doubtful of the student's story about how her stepfather, got into an argument with Deborah on that trail. It's just a little too perfect, convenient, and timely. And it also doesn't help because now here in 2025, he's dead. As for Will Parks, in relation to Deborah's disappearance, there is nothing against the law for someone to not want to talk to the police. In addition, Will had to know that if he killed Deborah, that not talking to the police would make him look guilty, yet he chose to not talk anyway. Really, I'm still not even remotely close to certain that Deborah's disappearance is a murder. Sally Stone. Could somebody have harmed her somewhere else, then planted her car back in the driveway where she lived? Yes, but this seems unlikely. meaning Sally really parked her car and got out without bringing the donuts. This means whatever happened occurred right then, as if someone had been waiting for her. Yet, I don't think Sally's schedule was known to anybody. I think that tells me all I need to know. Julie Weflen, regarding Will Parks for her disappearance, now we know the two were not in the Mountaineers together, and nobody has been able to prove they knew each other in any other way. Thus, to believe that he did it, he just randomly saw Julie working there at the substation and decided to drag her away. Well, this is so unlikely. What's clear to me is investigators' own egos have made Will a suspect in Deborah's and Julie's disappearances. Because Will won't talk to them, he's guilty. That's a horrible way to treat all of us who have freedom of speech and the freedom not to speak. A coworker of Julie's is still my best choice, especially since one of them brought up Will Parks, when we now know Will and Julie almost surely did not know each other. Why did that coworker bring Will up? If you'd like to hear more of my in-depth analysis into all 4 of these disappearances, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.